Okay. I was asked about Arthur Young by one of the readers of my YouTube videos or viewers, and I I commented, I replied back, but YouTube doesn't really, you don't. It's hard. Sometimes you don't know if you get any replies or whatever. So I just thought I'd make a quick video about Arthur Young, and in the context of Terrence Howard. Um, I did a video. I actually wrote a paper about Terrence Howard. Of course, he quickly became like the laughing stock of the science community because he was making some claim about I can't even remember the specifics of his claim, but I think it was something like one times one equals two, something like that. And my claim about Terrence Howard was, well, he was relating it then to the octave metaphysics of who's that guy? I can't even remember his name either, but it's another like music healing guy who people like a lot. I want to say William somebody. Anyway, uh, did not discuss him in my 2012 book, but anyway, so the point is that I just finished the book Negative Math by Alberto Martinez, and his whole point is like when you look at square roots, the you have a absolute value, which is what science relies on in physics because they want mathematics to align with what they consider to be physical realities. So therefore, they dismiss the negative answer that can be a possibility for a square root. So when you have a square root, you can have plus one or negative one, or whatever it is. I mean, it's whatever the square root could be, plus or negative. And so Alberto Martinez, he starts out by saying, well, just because a number is negative doesn't mean it's less than in terms of quantity. It could just be a change of direction in terms of vector or for velocity. And so then um um so then he then constructs a different type of algebra that's a non-commutative algebra, and then he just describes this algebra as being logically consistent, and he's saying, well, you know scientists have created different mathematics. So for example, in vector math and physics, they have what they call the cross product. So it's just a different rule of mathematics. And his whole point in that book was like when um heavy side and who was it? Um can't remember who else, but essentially they took the quaternions of Hamiltonian that Maxwell was using, and they said, "Oh, we can't use this because it can't apply to physical reality, and so we're going to change the mathematics into vector mathematics and simplify the equations." And so when people learn electromagnetic physics, the laws of Maxwell or whatever, they're learning this vector mathematics and not the quaternion mathematics. So, for example, when Tesla's engineering was being analyzed, this guy Steinmetz, he developed the mathematics of Tesla's inventions, and he had a concept called wattless power, and in Tesla's um, inventions, the wattless power was actually from this non-commutative mathematics. So it would have been the same as what Maxwell had been using with the quaternions. And so when you have the non-commutative math, essentially the basic concept is whenever you make an external measurement, it takes time to make the measurement, so the time is inherent in the mathematical operation. So when you do the operation, it actually changes the value of the equation. Now, this goes against the whole concept of symmetric mathematics as irrational magnitude. So in symmetric mathematics, the definition of a unit is also what they would call a what's the other word for it? But basically, how you define the number one, ever since Platonic mathematics, is actually defined by this symmetric uh, geometry of the irrational magnitude. And so it goes back to music theory because the square root of 2 is actually secretly derived from music theory as a tritone, from the 9/8 a major second music interval, which is then cubed. Um, so you have three major second notes, and that takes, like, if the first note was C as the number one, then 9/8 cubed would be the F sharp as a logarithmic value. So that's what splits the octave. And that goes back to Simon Stevin in the 1600s. And he relied on the major third to do this. So Archytas had extended the Pythagorean tetrad, the tetractys, to 5/4. So originally it was 1, 2, 3, 4, and that was alchemy. As Pythagorean philosophy, is alchemical meditation based on the perfect fifth and perfect fourth. That was actually non-commutativity. But by extending it to 5/4, what he was doing was assuming that the perfect fifth was inherently squared as the unit one. So when you square the unit one, then you can um, have 3/2 become 9/4, and then the and then he's taking the geometric, so that becomes the geometric mean squared, um, which then gets reduced to 5/4 and um, as the major third, and then the minor six would be 8/5. And I go into the details of this in my 2012 book. And in the discussion of Arthur Young, he's basically saying, well, when you take into consideration an inscribed circle with the um, imaginary number, then you inherently have the creation of a third dimension due to this asymmetric time in the algebra. So because the mathematics is non-commutative, you actually have this inherent motion of the time axis. So because the time is inherently in motion, then it creates the third dimension from time directly at the speed of light. Now in relativity, it's said this is not possible because they assume that any kind of measurement you make has to be done from mass because you're matter. You define yourself as matter and you're making an external measurement. But if you rely on logical inference and then you're defining yourself by listening to the source of sound, and the source of light through meditation, what they call turning the light around in meditation, and then listening to the source of the light. This process does not inherently rely on mass because the whole definition of mass itself assumes the symmetric irrational magnitude mathematics to then convert the squaring process of geometry into a weighing process. So Newton was inspired directly by Archytas, and so he said that the doubling of the octave then is a squaring of the weight, and which is true when if you're relying on um, the magnitude process of measuring the music theory. So I go into all the details of the mathematics. I'm sure I'm probably remembering some of the details wrong, but I go into the details in my 2012 book because obviously math is like boring and dry and stuff. So compared to music. So if we look at my 2012 book, oh, here I got it right here. It's this big tome, and unfortunately, I do not have an index. And if I look it up online, I can just word search it, so that'll be much easier to look it up. Look up the what I wrote about Puharich, and I can post the link in the chat. Um, okay, so yeah, it's no longer in the Docdroid. It used to be a Docdroid posting. Let me see. Yeah, here it is. Oh no. Okay. Yeah, it got taken down from Docdroid apparently. I didn't post it up there originally, but it's on my uh it doesn't even come up in Google when I search for it. So it could just be my own Google thing, but it's on my academia site because I uploaded it to the academia. I don't know how I did that because I don't have it on my computer. Anyway, yeah, here it is. So it's a good thing that I got it uploaded because it's not on the Docdroid anymore. So I'll post it in the chat. Okay, whoops, that's my file. I'm gonna delete that because that's not gonna, here, this is what it, yeah, should, it should be this one. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so now I'm gonna word search it because you got 575 pages. Okay, so if I word search Arthur, I get 11. Here we go. So Arthur Young was a major shareholder in Bell Telephone Company and a close friend of Andrei Puharich. And he was one of the inventors of the Bell helicopter. So he says the cube roots of one are the points that divide the circle into three equal parts, but these roots can be expressed in terms of square roots. And this is what creates the Gauss I1 grid and proves that time is inherently asymmetrical. And Dr. Heinz Pagel then, in his book Perfect Symmetry, says if space is highly curved, then the particles are created out of nothing. Um, and then this imaginary math was used in the Egyptian periods, according to Napier's book, The Story of I, An Imaginary Tale. So, I don't, I guess I don't even have the equation in this book. So the question is, what comes first, number or physics? And it's a big debate in science. I go into this in or page 444. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I thought I had the equation in the book, but I don't. I go in the music equation. My music equation actually was inspired by math professor Joseph Maser, who's the brother of math professor Barry Maser, who's like famous in number theory. So the whole thing with Terrence Howard is about number theory and whether Terrence is correct or not in his particular claims, probably not. But the thing is that he does raise some valid questions that are then addressed by this whole concept of asymmetric time as a quantum non-local algebraic process. So that's pretty much what I want to get into, that the square roots actually originate from this discrete number algebraic process that itself is from music theory. And my 2012 book goes into that music theory. So I developed an equation, and the idea was, well, how are ratios converted into um, irrational numbers um, from fractions, music fractions, and because the ratios are considered inherently symmetric, and that's what Professor Dave is emphasizing. But it has to do with how you define the continuum, and this is what math professor Luigi Borzicchini was investigating, that the whole concept of the continuum based on irrational magnitude actually originated from incommensurability in the music ratios as a logon, which is called a logon, and then became the square root of 2, is also called the third in Arabic, which then means unutterable, meaning it can only be proven through logical inference in silence originally, as what Luigi Borzicchini called the negative judgment paradox. But then the claim was, well, when you could convert that to geometry, then you can say, oh, we can see it, and therefore we can believe it as um, the absurdity, or whatever they call that, absurdity proof by contradiction. But the proof by contradiction, it's not a positive proof. It just says it's not a rational ratio, and therefore it has to be this irrational number. But that's not necessarily true, because non-commutativity is the non-local alternative. That's not a rational ratio, but it is a asymmetric process that's non-local, as logical inference. So that's what I wanted to point out. It's a subtle difference, but makes a big difference. So